Historic, the first trial against corruption in Pedro Sanchez's government. Let's begin. Hello everyone and welcome to a new edition of Precautionary Measures with Miguel Ángel Pérez. We already have a date for the first trial that will be held in the Supreme Court, specifically against the corruption in Pedro Sánchez's government, against his former right-hand man, José Luis Ábalos. And pay attention, because we also have a decision about which witnesses will testify and which ones will not during that oral hearing that will be held in the month. Let's share this information because the truth is there are many things to discuss and we're going to do it as always by sharing it on screen. Do you already have it there to follow along? And pay attention, this was the face of José Luis Ábalos during that preliminary hearing that took place a few weeks ago in the Supreme Court, where the preliminary issues were presented by the parties, according to which the trial had to be annulled or not. And there was Ábalos sitting honestly with a lost look, very drowsy. And we already have the decision from the Supreme Court in response to all those preliminary issues requested by the parties, that is, the defense teams of José Luis Ábalos, Koldo García, and so on. And we already have the Supreme Court's ruling. The Supreme Court has set the date for the first trial that the network will face. Koldo. The oral hearing in which former Minister José Luis Ábalos and his former advisor, Koldo García, will be tried will begin on April 7th at 10 in the morning. Ábalos and Koldo are accused of receiving alleged illegal kickbacks in exchange for awarding mask purchase contracts without a bidding process. The Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office is requesting 24 years in prison for Ábalos, 19.5 years for Koldo, and 7 years for the other defendant, who is the businessman Victor de Aldama, who has stood out for his role in cooperating with the justice system since the beginning of this case, this investigation, in a procedural order signed by the clerk of the court administration. It is specified that by virtue of the decision dated March 3rd from the Supreme Court, and according to the criteria of the Chamber, the start of the oral trial sessions will take place on April 7th at 10 in the morning. The schedule for the development of the subsequent sessions and their conclusion dates will be set in a later resolution. This has been shown after he received the Supreme Court's decision. And attention, this decision is 138 pages long. The decision in which the Supreme Court dismisses all the preliminary issues that had been presented by the defenses of Ábalos and Koldo. It's worth noting that, as I was saying, the Supreme Court's criminal chamber has dismissed all those preliminary issues. And obviously the time has come to get into the subject and find out exactly what has been rejected and what has been accepted by the Supreme Court, so that the trial can take place on April 7, that oral hearing can begin on April 7. The Supreme Court denies Koldo Garcia's defense request for a face-to-face confrontation between Aldama and Koldo, and that the latter, specifically Koldo Garcia, can take a polygraph test as his defense had requested. You know, the so-called lie detector. The Supreme Court rejects it. The Supreme Court states a face-to-face confrontation isn't primary evidence or evidence itself, but a supplement to other evidence. That's what the Supreme Court specifically said about the face-to-face confrontation issue. And in the same way, it doesn't accept the polygraph either, and the Supreme Court says that the polygraph cannot replace it. The role of the courts is to evaluate the evidence presented during the oral trial under the principles of publicity, immediacy, and orality. In addition, it is a type of evidence that is not recognized as valid in the Spanish legal system. And pay attention, because now we are going to talk directly about witnesses, the witnesses who have been accepted by the Supreme Court and those who have been rejected. Pay attention, because we are going to talk about very important names for both sides. Regarding the request for testimonial evidence, the court accepts in the order all the witnesses proposed by the prosecutor's office and by Aldama. As for those requested by Ábalos, it admits all except for the Minister of the Interior, Fernando Grande Marlaska. That is, we are not going to see Fernando Grande Marlaska testifying as a witness in the trial. Among those proposed by Ábalos and accepted is the Minister of Territorial Policy, Ángel Víctor Torres. That is, Ángel Víctor Torres. Are we going to see him testifying in the trial? and also the President of the Congress of Deputies and former President of the Balearic Islands, Francina Armengol, who had also been requested by the other defendant, Koldo Garcia. The court of 7 judges that will try this case rejects 8 of the witnesses requested by Koldo Garcia. Among them are also Grande Marlaska, as well as the President of the Generalitat and Minister of Health, Salvador Illa. As well as 13 of those requested by the popular prosecution, the popular prosecution had also requested its witnesses, and 13 are rejected, specifically judges. They are, no more and no less, the President of the government, Pedro Sánchez, the Vice President and Minister of Finance, María Jesús Montero, and the former Minister of Industry, Reyes Maroto. In total, the Supreme Court has accepted more than 75 witnesses, as well as about 20 experts. Among the admitted witnesses are, in addition to Minister Ángel Víctor Torres and the President of Congress, Francina Armengol. The President of the Court of Auditors, a regular on precautionary measures with Miguel Ángel Pérez, is Enriqueta Chicano, who has been requested by Ábalos, and by Koldo, the former President of ADIF, Isabel Pardo de Vera, who has been requested by all parties. The former Secretary of State for the Interior, that is Marlaska's former number 2, who was Rafael Pérez. Also the Director General of the Police, who is Francisco Pardo Piqueras, at the request of Koldo Garcia, the former manager of the PSOE, Mariano Moreno, who has been requested by Ábalos, Koldo, and the popular prosecution, as well as former chiefs of staff of the Ministers of Health and Industry, former presidents of Renfe, Correos, and state ports, and several businessmen, relatives, and close associates of the accused. This is the Supreme Court's decision, and at this point, all that's left is to find out the schedule of the sessions. Of course, with all the witnesses that have been accepted, more than 75 witnesses, which is truly an outrageous number, well, the trial. The truth is that, just off the top of my head, it could easily last more than a month. And without a doubt, we were left wanting to see the testimony of Pedro Sánchez. Of course, also of Marlaska. But anyway, we will have the Minister of Policy and Territory, Ángel Víctor Torres, and also the President of Congress, Francina Armengol, who, by the way, is also implicated just like Torres in the issue of the masks. So, well, President of the implicated, the Junta, Republic, and also the President, not bad at all. It's also true that the Supreme Court has avoided turning the trial into a circus by rejecting the confrontation that Koldo's defense had requested between Koldo himself and Aldama. The polygraph test was also not admitted, which was more fitting for an entertainment show than for the deputies, the Board of Deputies, which is what it is. A trial in the Supreme Court, and that's also important. The Supreme Court has rejected the request from Koldo Garcia's defense to submit a preliminary question to the CJEU to see if this case should be tried in the National Court and not in the Supreme Court, which was a way for the defenses of Ábalos and de Koldo to buy time so that the case would go back to square one. And for these events to be tried in the National Court and in the Supreme Court. Everything has been dismissed by the Supreme Court, and now we just have to wait for the one in April. We will be there, of course, on the day the oral hearing begins, as well as every day when these sessions take place, all these statements, etc. The main event, I'm sure, aside from the statements of Ábalos and Koldo, is going to be the statement of Víctor Daldama. I think things could get heated there, and we might get a few surprises. I'll tell you more about it later. And of course, those witness statements. We'll wait for the schedule for them to tell us the session calendar of the Supreme Court. And of course, with any updates, you'll have all the information. Where? Right here on Precautionary Measures with Miguel Ángel Pérez. That's it for this edition of Precautionary Measures with Miguel Ángel Pérez. You already know that you can become members like the chosen ones for less than €3 a month and like the supreme ones for less than €7 a month. I also appreciate your support via Bizum at 627,556,000, 327,556,370. Because the truth is that it helps keep this going, so that we can keep sharing all the information you find on this channel, which you probably won't find on other channels or in other media outlets. That's what it's for. That's what makes it meaningful. Precautionary measures. The most important thing, as I always tell you, is that this information reaches everyone, because information is power. See you soon.